Hello and welcome everyone to Insights. I'm Nnamdi Odipo.
And I'm Elizabeth Omori. Thank you for joining us on Insight this week.
May 1, 2025 was commemorative of this year's Labour Day, with workers all over the world, taking out time to reflect on the struggle and journey of the working man. Of course, the day also provides an opportunity to re-energize for the struggle ahead. As we say, Aluta, Continua, Victoria Asata. And so this week, my guest and I will be reflecting on some of the issues impacting the Nigerian worker, organized labor, as well as the claim of a repressed civil space in Nigeria. Elizabeth would be next, with an equally engaging conversation on an equally profound subject matter. Elizabeth?
Of course, we'll also be looking at Africa's rich heritage as a treasure trove for history, traditions, and values. Now, basically, preservation of tangible and intangible assets for economic development of the African continent.
Very well then, let's kickstart the program.
Whatever the issues are,
the National Assembly is constitutionally empowered to scrutinize,
however complex or intricate.
We have involved all the academia, the members of the academia. We have involved the academies.
Be it government policies or in fact any issue of public concern.
Our job is to help you gain clarity and make sense of it all.
This is not really healthy for our democracy.
There's a lot of agreements in terms of who has been in power longest and who becomes the governor of the state.
It's also in the quality of food being consumed.
After all, perception is insight.
And gaining understanding is also getting insight.
Beyond the rhetorics and parades, the International Labour Day, otherwise known as the Workers' Day, carries a raw, unyielding fruit. And that truth is that the fight for dignity is never a relic of the past, but that it is a fire that must be kept alive. You see, here in Nigeria, the resolve and the resilience of the worker, the Nigerian worker, are continuously tested. And, their willpower for Aluta Continua often stretched to the limit. But the question is, will real progress remain a promise for the working man, or let's say for the working woman in Nigeria? Or with the workers' solidarity anthem, that's Aluta Continuas, Victoria Asata, would that remain a battle cry in perpetuity? Now, let me bring in my guest, the head of international relations for the Nigerian Labour Congress, Comrade Uchenna Ekwe. Thanks for joining us on Insight. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Comrade, I recall you being here in our network news studio on May 1 when we had this focus group conversation on the same subject matter. I'm also sure you participated in our online survey where we asked Nigerians to pick 1 out of 3 options, on the area they want government to give the most priority in order to improve workers' productivity in Nigeria. Comrade, incidentally, you left before the poll results came out, but I'd like to tell you what the poll said. The poll showed that 68.7% of our respondents, that they chose living wage reforms as the most important area for government's intervention. I'm sure that is not surprising to you, but I'd like to know why you think Nigerians may have gone that way, especially given the context that we're talking about improved productivity. One would have assumed that perhaps upskilling the worker, in addition to providing other social safety nets, should ordinarily take priority. Don't you agree, comrade?
First, they are not mutually exclusive.
Okay.
The point is that a living wage does not stop to improve on the other these things. But somebody who doesn't have a living wage, who may not be able to transport himself to get to the office, or even if you are provided health care and he can't transport himself to even get to the hospital, it's a non-starter. So, and giving the worker a living wage does not by any means say you don't need to improve his skill and also be sure you have a good access to Medicare and other social amenities. So it can be surprising because in a situation where the wage is not able to even keep the family for one day, it's not acceptable. And the immediate family pressure is too high to even understand any other suggestion.
Okay? So it's not surprising. I suspect that was your choice when you chose, when you participated in our polls, right?
Yes, that was my choice. Because if you say healthcare, first, a clear knowledge of the system tells you that even that process is neither here nor there. That even before you get there, and I can use several examples to show you.
Okay.
When the government, even under the military, came up with the idea of contribution by workers to housing, the workers, yes, with the promises that the workers will be able to get housing through mortgage, which will remove the pressure from the worker. The worker's deduction was done, or continuously has been done. But we had a situation where the other contributors, starting from government to insurance and social responsibility contribution that should come from companies, never came. In fact, the situation degenerated in those days, because some of us have been there and know the history, where the first fund the Minister for Works goes for, or Minister for Work and Housing, as they were then, was to go and take the workers' contribution, fix in the bank, and be making money out of it. And the worker never benefited from it. It became a huge problem that during the coming of this back to democratic rule, there have been talks about improvement, but that improvement have not gotten to answer the demands of the workers. The worker who had that knowledge that his money is up to today being deducted, and he still doesn't have the kind of access promised to housing, knows that it will still be a chase that will not come to be. Same thing with contribution to health insurance. It is only recent that we started getting a flicker of what makes a bit of sense. So to give those promises, and those deductions are being done from the existing salary, which the salary is not even enough in the first place, and those deductions are made. So the worker is clear about what he will need first.
Okay, I hear you, and I hear you clearly, comrade. I am going to play the devil's advocate here. And this is an issue that has been, that is front and center in this discourse, whether it's whether you're talking about collective bargaining, you're talking about wages reforms. And this is how labor unions, balance the advocacy, and struggle for fair wages against what the government often tells and puts forward as existing resources in light of the financial crisis that we find ourselves facing oftentimes, Would you prefer, comrade, for the government to give priority to workers' survival over measures that they put in place to improve the economy or boost the economy, measures often referred to as austerity measures, for instance?
I will approach it from several dimensions. First and foremost is that primary economics tells us that no individual, no nation have enough resources for what
True.
he or she want to do.
True.
So scarcity is part and parcel of life of nations and individuals. And primary economics recognize that fact. And that is why the beginner economic study in economics in secondary school takes you to opportunity cost, choice. You know, and it clarifies that what you do is what you place as priority. So the question is, where does the government place the welfare of the worker? If you place it in the scale of preference, down, you will never have resources to do it. So a scale of preference. In the opportunity cost and choice and scale of preference, where does the welfare of the working people and the citizens come? If it goes down, and in the scale of preference, what happens to the rich and the big becomes number one. There will never be resources to deal with that. Having said so, I move to the next stage of looking at the issue. I have often used this example when we talk about resources and management. And I prefer using a simple analogy. And I won't get tired of using that simple analogy of a family. A father comes into the house and calls a family meeting with the wife and the children and said, look, guys, this family is under pressure financially now. And we are going to do adjustments to the way we live, which includes our feeding. And he now says, we are going to eat once a day. And the whole family members say, okay, in these circumstances, we go with you, Daddy. We eat once a day. And everybody got up. Only while the children went to farm or to school, on their way back, their father was in a beer parlor with about 6 bottles of beer on the table, pepper soup, and other things. Do you think that that logic, that family agreement will still work?
I doubt that very much. And I don't know why I suspected that was where the story was heading to.
Yes.
You know, my grandma usually says that if you want to talk to a child, you open your mouth and you talk to the child. That if you want to talk to the adult, that you, even from the expression on your face, and that, you know, that the adult already sees it and understands what you're saying. So, comrade, what you're saying is that the welfare of the worker cannot be the foregone alternative.
Yes.
You know, so do you then think
and now we are made to believe there are scarce resources. And the way and manner, the opulence upon which the leaders and political leaders are living in this scarce situation cannot be defended.
Do you then think that given the scenario you've painted, that maybe there might just be a somewhat of, you know, a suppression, that maybe deliberate suppression of workers' wages in Nigeria, perhaps to destabilize union solidarity and fragment, you know, workers' resistance? I guess my question is, what exactly is your thought on how low wages in Nigeria might intentionally weaken collective bargaining by keeping workers desperate and compliant?
Yeah, you got it straight. But I also want to warn that that's a dangerous trend and a dangerous approach.
But you think there's something like that at play?
Well, yes, because it shows that first, that there are people, some people, in the corridors of power and governance who have little or no respect, not to workers, but to human beings. Because, at times, when we talk about the wages, the way we talk about it looks like it's an abstract thing. Until we realize that it's not abstract. We are talking about the life and living condition of human beings and families. So, because it's important to get it in this context, so that somebody said, oh, let's weaken the unions, or let's weaken their solidarity. That is far from it. You're only saying, let's get people to die in the families. Let's get human beings to die. Because if in a family, the man is so handicapped to give the children food, and is so handicapped that the child is sick, and they can't get the minimum medical attention, and that child dies, let it be known that those in authority that have kept the people in that abject poverty killed those individuals.
I hear you, comrade, and this is quite a passionate, issue, touchy, yes, passionate for union leaders like yourself, and quite intriguing for workers, ordinary workers like myself and many Nigerian workers out there, because the issue of wages is something we are all vested in. But let me redirect our conversation now to an issue that organized labor raised during this year's Labor Day, Workers' Day. And that was the call to leave no worker behind. This raises concerns about Nigeria's vast informal sector, where millions lack protection. I remember Comrade Ajero on TV on May Day saying some of how this plays out in some of the private sector and some of the scenarios playing out and what Labour has seen. But my question to you is, are there perhaps specific policies that the NLC is championing to extend labor rights, extend social security, give dignity to some of these marginalized workers? And what are some of these targets? And perhaps, is there like a timeline? Because time and again, before Ajero's time, NLC said the same thing. Before the last, is there perhaps a new timeline for this inclusivity drive?
Yeah, let's x-ray the true situation. During the last minimum wage negotiation, at a point we paid more attention to the coverage. Easily, people are carried away by saying, oh, what the labor is demanding is unrealistic, without paying attention to the consequences and the details of it. Before, the coverage for minimum wage was for those who employ up to 50 people. We've conversed that it should be from one person, especially with high-tech industries coming. If you don't protect the wage worker, and it will shock you, part of the examples I'll give you, a lawyer, a graduate lawyer, working in a chambers, and a good number of the chambers might have just 5 lawyers. It's not protected by the minimum wage law. So that lawyer might earn far less than 70,000.
Is that the true situation?
That's the true situation. You can ask your lawyer friends. But the argument can go, oh, they are not up to 50. Then you take somebody working in a high-tech industry where 3 persons can produce trillions of naira. And it's not protected. So if there is no magnanimity from the owner of the industry, that person can be paid peanut. And in the face of high-level unemployment, can easily be blackmailed, that if you don't work, you go employ new people. So now, the government itself have not taken the holistic view of the danger of that. Elsewhere in Europe and other parts of the world, people are not insisting on working for government because the minimum wage protects them even as a barber in a shop. Also, he is entitled to pensions and gratuity in retirement. Those are the protection the worker, whether it's informal or private or government, needs. If that happens, people will not want to die looking for a government job because the job they do, cleaning in a house or doing a mechanic, guarantees him some security of a guaranteed level of wage, including pensions.
So, comrade, you think the issue is not just having this minimum wage in place, but also enforcing it and ensuring compliance across all levels?
Yeah, that's why I say that this goes back to where we started, scale of preference.
Again.
What is the respect of those in authority? What is their care about the citizens? What do they make of the citizens? Do they believe that these citizens are entitled to live and live properly? Why do I say so? If the authority in this country, from the federal authority to the judicial headship, have respect for this, a governor who has sworn an oath to uphold the constitution and the laws of the land is in disobedience to a minimum wage law, the law and the court would have held him or her as the governor responsible. And the worker knowing that if you go to court, because the law is explicit, that at the expiring of the month and the governor does not pay, you shouldn't spend 10 years for litigation for such a simple, straightforward pronouncement to take place and enforced.
You know, but given the situation and now some of these, you know, you've mentioned a couple of scenarios, given how they are playing out, I'm not saying NLC isn't doing much. We see what the NLC does. And in fact, this brings me to another issue that organized labor raised during the commemoration of this year's May Day celebrations. You know, an aspect which was part of the rallying cry to reclaim civic space. That implies, or otherwise implies, that there's a shrinking environment, whether it's for advocacy or whether it's for strike now or protest. I'll say advocacy. But let's look at the flip side and talk about how labor plans to redress some of these issues that, you know, it calls or identifies as repressive. You know, closing the space for workers' voices, you know, to be heard. Is NLC doing anything aside protest, which, yes, maybe they are right, but has to be done in a civic way as well? Is NLC engaging to ensure that workers' voices remain central in national dialogue?
Well, you've even answered the question. What else can NLC do? First is to keep educating its members.
Okay.
Putting it in the front burner like we did in the May Day, that in the only way to go is that we cannot abandon the civic space. That no matter how repressive the system is appearing, that
so
giving
you
up...
do not think it's a function of leadership, that maybe NLC is not leading enough?
Well, I will...
Or leading rightly?
No, if I start answering that, I don't want to answer it in a way being from the NLC that I am being self-defensive. But let me put it this way. The NLC have not come short of putting out what the challenge is. Bear in mind, the NLC cannot be leading and following. It's not possible. So we will lead by saying, this is the way to go. The Nigerian people will follow by saying, we agree. Because they agree. Because these challenges, like you said when you are talking, affects the Nigerian people. So if the NLC now articulates this, which should be its role, to articulate, because I don't think anybody have accused NLC of not articulating these challenges. Now, if they articulate these challenges, do you now make an Ijero to now be on the street and be the same workers that they have not been paid, who may choose to be in their house when it's on the street?
So it's the
How
case,
does the NLC do that?
Comrade, is it the case of taking the horse to the stream, but not forcing the horse to drink from the stream?
We also understand why the people might not come. We are not blaming them. Because the target is to repress the people in such a way that their voice of crying out will even be silenced. And that's why that topic came. Don't get fed up. Don't get repressed. The only way you can get back is to say, this is not acceptable. Historically, we are not doing anything new.
True.
It can be, if you don't get the picture, and if you don't know that
I actually do get the picture, you know, and I do understand your point of view and where you're coming from. But yet again, comrades, there are reports, you know, maybe allegedly or alleging backdoor deals, patronage networks, and even quid pro quo, you know, betrayals of labor mandates, often perpetuated by insiders themselves, unionists, union labor leaders. But let me land, comrade. I'm not accusing anyone. I'm just saying.
You can go ahead.
No, I'm just saying that it's always been there. After all, comrade, there can be no smoke without fire. You know, but what mechanisms allow the NLC to maintain its autonomy and not allow corporations or maybe even politicians to co-opt union leaders?
All right. First, this has been a recurring question. And I'll go brutally from the first one. And I take it from the present government. If this government have compromised the leadership of NLC and have the evidence, we will be in jail by now. Because they are that ruthless. We'll be in jail. Because I'm sure they will throw out the document for everybody to see how they bribed us. They have not hidden their anger against us. They will bring out the document that show they bribed us. That's one part.
Okay.
The other part, the labor movement, as big as it is, it will be foolhardy on my part not to know that it could be possible that some segment may have been compromised.
So
It will be foolhardy. But let me also take it back to the people.
Okay.
For Christians, Jesus Christ have just 12
disciples.
And one betrayed. How does Nigerians expect that the labor movement, that there won't be traitors and betrayers within the system?
Let's leave it. Let's leave it there. Because we're out of time.
This has been a recurring question.
Okay.
So I take it back to the people, and I'll give an example. I started working in the unions as a very young boy.
Okay.
During the IBB regime, he increased the price of petroleum product. The Nigerian Labour Congress called a NEC meeting of the then 41 affiliate unions. Only 8 of the affiliate union, only 8, agreed to go on strike. The other number said they will not. The 8 leaders called a national strike. As a young unionist, we agreed that those leaders should go underground. Because even now, people will be asking, where is Ajero? We agreed that the leaders should go into hiding. We, the younger people, went out after they made the pronouncement. Nigerian people followed the 8 unions.
So Nigerians will know who to follow.
And abandoned the 31, including the members of the union of those who decided there will be no strike.
And I'm sure that was a turning point for
and the government was forced to plead with those 8 leaders for a meeting, because the people will not also go back from the strike if those who say they are not going on strike go to TV and say there is no strike and call them to go back. So the Nigerian people will also be ready to go with those who are ready to fight. And we're ready to do that.
Comrade, we've just about used up our entire time. But very quickly, before you go, and we're going to end on this issue, I'm sure that you know that the government often critiques unions for underusing negotiation. And the unions on the other side, or conversely, views strikes as necessary when bargaining fails to deliver what they consider as justice or equity. What and how does the principle of collective bargaining factor in bridging this divide, that gap, that requires addressing the obvious power tussle, or maybe I use imbalances? And how do we foster a culture of mutual accountability? Very quickly, comrade.
Yeah, for example, if you go and check, let me pick out ASU strikes.
Okay.
Most of the ASU strike have been on the failure of government to keep to what had been agreed on the bargaining table. So, 2, most of the times, the Nigerian people accuse NLC. Usually, is that NLC have given government notice, called for discussion, which is the way to go. Those letters will call for negotiation to conclude. And the government never obeys it until a strike action is threatened. Even when it's threatened, they won't call a meeting after a 21-day notice was given until 2 days to the expiration of the date. That expressly tells you the person who have no respect for collective bargaining. So,
again, it goes back to all labor is saying. The demand for respect, the demand for dignity. Labor wants for government to accord the Nigerian worker this respect. Comrade Uchenna Ekwe, if we were to continue, I'm pretty sure there will be plenty of issues to talk about, plenty more perspectives to bring up. But unfortunately, we're out of time. So we would draw the curtains here, and I would look for another opportunity to continue this conversation. I'd like to thank you so much for coming on the program. It's been a delight listening to your take, your position, your stance on some of the critical issues that we've thrown up in the course of our discussion. I'd like to thank you so much for coming on our program. Comrade Uchenna Ekwe, Head of International Relations for the Nigeria Labour Congress, NLC. Thank you so much indeed for coming on our program.
Thank you very much.